process?
Yeah, a good question. And the first thing people need to do is really figure out what they mean by risk, right? And this has been something that's been sort of vexing for organizations. What do you use for risk? There are a lot of risk assessment standards and guidelines out there. And what we try to do is help people think through what is the likelihood of an impact and what could that impact be, but have a systematic way to think that through, and to have a consistent way to think it through. Not just to think about the impact to your organization, but the impact to others. When we're working with systems and information, we can hurt others, right? So we have to think about what could hurt us, what could hurt others, do that systematically. But if we also do it in a way where we realize that the risk is not just about the kind of harm that can come from a system or a hacker or a malware or data being leaked, there's a lot of harm that can come from regulators, a lot of harm that can come from judges and juries, a lot of harm that can come from executives. And what we mean by that is that we have to figure out, are the safeguards that we're applying provably in balance with the risk that we're trying to protect against? So that's, when we talk about risk analysis, we want to be sure that people have a consistent way to think through what could happen to multiple parties, including ourselves, and are our safeguards in balance. What we liked about the CIS controls is you start by saying, let's look at the basic and the fundamental issues that are going to be really important to addressing those issues that we know to be common causes. And then further risk analysis, which we'll be able to talk about in a little bit more, just gets you to figure out how to make that fit in your organization for your particular risk.
Perfect, thank you. And Tony, this question always comes up about the CIS controls in the context of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Sure. So, the question for you is, can you describe how the controls help complement an organization's effort to implement the NIST cybersecurity framework or other regulatory requirements?
Sure. Yeah, the CIS has always been directly involved with and supportive of the development of the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? And it's the closest thing we have to what we'll call a universal language at a high level of risk, in terms of the functions and categories and a consistent way to describe that problem. But it wasn't designed as an implementation framework, right? So it then points to things like the CIS controls, like ISO, like the FISMA catalog, et cetera, as a way to get a handle on the specific action items that you should take. So that's a sensible way, kind of makes sense with the NIST charter, and it's a way to sort of hand off the business of prioritization and actions to something that's already developed and already common in the industry. And that was by design from the NIST framework. So we're part of that. We map, of course, we're within the NIST documentation as one of the informative references. We map back to it. So we can tell anyone who adopts our work, here's how to present yourself in terms of the NIST framework. And lots of other frameworks do that also. In fact, we don't speak of CIS controls as a framework at all. Right? We're really more of like a priority scheme or a management scheme. How do I assign action items? What's my most important thing to do, as Greg noted? That is intended to be consistent with all these. I mentioned earlier, and we've done surveys jointly with some companies, and many of you are living this now, right? This multi-framework era. So if we accept that, everyone wants to look over your shoulder to see if you're doing the right thing, right? Well, at CIS, we could argue, well, we're the best right thing there is out there, and so pay attention to us. Or we can acknowledge that our adopters have to live in this world. So we're very focused on how do we make it easy for them to use our work, yet report it, in like the world that Greg lives, or to the legal system, the way Chris talks about it, or to in the NIST framework, right? If your management believes that that's the right way to have that conversation with key partners about risk, then we want to help our adopters make that as easy as possible, right? So that means, by agreement, we have to say then we have to be able to speak the right language, and part of our language simplification was to use consistent terms, particularly from NIST, wherever possible, and to be able to present our work in those terms. So again, this whole notion of a prove to others I've done the right thing, I think is really a driving theme for the future of this business. And we believe strongly at CIS in peaceful coexistence, right? We're going to support our adopters, make it easy for them to do these things. And so we have an agreement with NIST, for example, in the future that this is a handshake agreement at this stage. All of our information will be cross-referenced between the other, right? There'll be an authoritative statement between us that says, when you do this in the controls, that's what it means in the NIST framework, this is what it means to FISMA, and back again. And that way, no one has to dream this up on their own, right? There's no individual convincing an individual auditor this is the right thing. This is what we say is the right thing. So that's kind of a statement of our philosophy relative to NIST, but also these other frameworks.
Yep. So bottom line is we really have a strong partnership with NIST, and there is a complement between what we're doing with the CIS controls and also with the NIST cybersecurity framework and also with 853 for that. So I'm going to go ahead and ask one more question, since you guys are so brief and succinct with the first question. The questions go to Kelly. And in your opinion, what is the most common pitfall you see organizations taking when trying to implement the controls?
Well, Kurt, there's a couple things we've been seeing. The first one is not making it a community-wide or company-wide effort. And a lot of times we see some very earnest, hardworking IT folks, compliance folks who believe in the controls, and they spend hours and hours putting together ideas, plans, talk to other technical people, and they don't go and they talk to the executive team, or they don't go and talk to other departments. And I feel kind of bad. I feel sad that they're doing all this fabulous work. And we really try and encourage people to set up a committee and get other departments involved. Because believe it or not, if an organization implements the controls, there are fabulous benefits to other departments. Human Resources now has a better idea of what employees are, where they're working, what they're using. Probably we can clean up payroll systems, insurance systems by sort of knowing what's in our inventory, where devices are located, where people are working for the day, especially in this sort of virtualized world we work in. And so we really encourage people to set up a committee and have a charter. You probably have a project management office in your organization. You probably have a project manager. Become friends with them. They can help make life a whole lot easier. They know how to set up work breakdown structures, set up charters, set up a plan that will sort of kind of ease into the controls and also spread communications about the good work that's happening. The other thing we've seen organizations do is, because it's a prioritized list, they start with number one and they say, well, we're not going to do anything until number one is 80% complete or 90 or 100% complete. We are encouraging organizations, first of all, to read through all the controls. If you're a workstation member, read the networking stuff. If you're a data classification specialist, look at the inventory information and sort of understand the whole overview of the controls, but then get together within your departments and break up the controls. Just because it's a prioritized list doesn't mean you can't have multiple work efforts happening at the same time. We've had some customers say, boy, this is taking forever. And we said, well, why can't you give controls 15 and 16 over to your networking group, or why can't you sort of segment this off and segment that off? They're like, well, but you said it was prioritized. It is prioritized in importance, but you can have multiple priorities.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Chris, so we've talked about this concept of due care, and we've talked about risk assessment methodologies. Maybe put it together from not only a HALOC, but also from a good partner we have, HOVL levels,
yeah,
as well as from a CIS perspective.
Yeah, good. So, I'll say that HALOC has done information security work, but we're generally keeping, like a lot of practitioners do, keeping an eye on what is down the road. What do we expect will happen, positive, negative, what have you. And one of the things that we know when helping people with working with regulators is that a regulator will eventually come into an organization and will have a checklist of things to ask. And if the organization doesn't know how to answer the question the way the regulator is prepared to ask the question, then they're going to be told by the regulator what to do in their organization. Well, you're a bank, so other banks are doing this, so do exactly what these other banks are doing. Or you're a grocer, so do all these things that the grocers do. And that puts the organization in a really bad spot. This is part of what I meant by saying, think about the bad thing that could happen, and sometimes it's a visit from a regulator. It isn't because regulators will get you in trouble. It's that they'll tell you what to do, and they might not know exactly how you function. That's why you see risk analysis in so many standards and requirements, and why it's so important to the cybersecurity framework. And then we've done litigation support, where a judge will, I don't know if you've been involved in situations like this during litigation when one party is suing another. The judge will have two experts, and they sort of fight it out in front of the judge. Now, the judge and the attorney is present don't know what the experts are saying. They just know that they're saying things against each other according to the role that they serve. And one of the best things you can do in a situation like that is turn to the judge and say, you know, you've got this thing that you call a duty of care balance test or a multi-factor balance test. And it has the following factors. And then you describe what the factors are, and you know what it is? It's a risk assessment. Did they foresee the threat? Did they think about the likelihood? Did they think about the impact? Did they think about alternative safeguards? Did they think about how the safeguards were going to not just protect the system, but were the safeguards providing what they call a reasonable burden? Were the safeguards more burdensome than the risk you're trying to protect? And if you've got a systematic way to describe that, and all of a sudden the nerd just takes the sword away from their opponent nerd by saying to the judge, you've got a duty of care balance test. We do too. It's called a risk assessment. And the risk assessment looks like this, and we've been able to demonstrate due care. But the phrase due care meaning that you were able to demonstrate that the likelihood and the impact of the threat that you were foreseeing, and you were thinking about the CIS control for inventory. There are some things I'm just not going to be able to keep track of. Let's say in a cloud environment where servers come up and down and you can't keep track of them. What is the likelihood and the impact of a threat that I'm concerned about? Well, Your Honor, I took a look at that. Or Dear Regulator, Dear Regulator works, by the way. Dear Regulator, I thought about the likelihood and the impact of that. I used the same criteria for that analysis that I used for every other threat. I thought about what was going to be acceptable and not acceptable to the public and to us. I looked at the way I would apply the CIS control, and I evaluated the CIS control the same way I applied my risk. And I checked to see if they were in balance. And if they're in balance, I got reasonable and appropriate. We've seen that conversation work over and over and over again in regulatory issues, in litigation. We've seen it work in the boardroom a lot. Because when you're doing that, you're saying, hey, by the way, board, I'm not telling you I need a lot of money because DLP is basically regular expression, evaluation of packets that go through an unencrypted network. No, I said the likelihood and the impact of a data breach through our firewall is intolerably high, but the cost of the DLP is way lower than the impact we could create. Oh, OK, yeah, we'll put that in your budget. That's a much better conversation to have, right? So we were very interested in working with CIS because I'm sure we've all read a lot of security standards. Is there anything better to read than the CIS controls? You know what you're being advised to do. It's really understandable. And if you're going to show someone risk analysis, and we've been working with CIS to develop a risk assessment method, it has to be very specific and guideline-y, and a lot of examples and a lot of instruction, very basic, just the way we see the CIS controls written, so that they're intelligible to the audience. So cat out of the bag, we've got CIS RAM coming out soon, a risk assessment method that CIS is working on that tells you exactly how you do that risk analysis using the CIS controls, so that if things can't exactly work the way you need them to, by applying a control to an asset, you've got a way to at least analyze the risk to determine whether or not what you're ending up with is safe. Right?
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Tony.